Under your feet, in the forest where you go for walks, a network stretches out. Hundreds of trees are connected to each other by it. Water, minerals, and even danger signals, if a neighboring tree is attacked by insects, move through these channels. This network is 450 million years old. It appeared with the first plants that emerged onto land. Without it, they wouldn't be here. And you, most likely, have heard almost nothing about it. We will be talking about a creature without eyes, ears, or a voice. It has no brain. It doesn't even have a whole body that could be shown completely in a shot. It cannot run or swim. It makes no growl or cry. And yet, it is one of the most magnificent living structures you have ever seen. It just lives in the dark, under a layer of leaves, between the roots of trees. And its name is mycorrhiza. Last time, we explored the mind in the ocean, the octopus with 8 minds in one body. Today, our gaze turns to the mind beneath our feet. Not a metaphorical one, not a poetic one, but one that actually unites living organisms into a single system where substances, water, and information are exchanged. And which is older than anything you are used to considering old. This channel is not just a collection of facts about animals. It is an exploration of the map of connections, about how an individual organism is woven into a network that we barely notice. The octopus is an extreme case of intelligence. Mycorrhiza is an extreme case of interconnectedness. One after another, they form a picture for which the usual documentary format proves too narrow. So, let's start with an observation that any of you can make next weekend. Go to the nearest forest. It doesn't have to be ancient. A regular mixed forest on the outskirts will do. Sit down at the base of a mature tree. Rake away the layer of fallen leaves. Beneath it, you will see forest soil, brownish black, moist, alive, slightly warm to the touch. Take a pinch. If you examine it under high magnification, you will notice very thin white threads. They look like very fine cotton wool or dense cobwebs. This is mycelium, the body of a fungus. We are used to calling what we see on the surface in autumn, the cap and stem, a mushroom. In reality, this is just the fruiting body. Like an apple on an apple tree, a way to disperse spores. The living organism itself is an underground network of threads capable of occupying hectares and living for hundreds and sometimes thousands of years. Now, the most important thing. For most trees, these threads are not just neighbors in the soil. They grow into the roots, intertwining the finest root endings from the outside and sometimes penetrating inside the cells. This is not parasitism or an accident. This is symbiosis, a mutually beneficial coexistence. The tree shares sugars with the fungus, which it creates from air and sun. In return, the fungus supplies the tree with water and minerals, phosphorus, nitrogen, trace elements, extracting and dissolving them from the soil much more efficiently than roots can. Fungal threads are thousands of times thinner than root hairs. They penetrate pores where roots cannot go. Their working surface in 1 cubic centimeter of soil is estimated to be tens of square meters. This is mycorrhiza. The term comes from 2 Greek words, fungus and root. It was introduced by the German botanist Albert Bernhard Frank in 1885. He was approached by the Prussian Ministry of Agriculture with the question of why truffles refused to grow away from oak trees. Truffles were then considered the most valuable commercial mushroom, and they wanted to learn how to cultivate them in nurseries. Examining oak roots under a microscope, Frank discovered fungal threads and realized this was not a disease. but normal. That the roots of most trees were not just roots, but roots fused with a fungus. For the first few decades, his discovery was considered a curiosity. Only in the 20th century did it become clear that Frank had described one of the most fundamental phenomena of the biosphere. Since then, we have learned that mycorrhiza is formed not by a handful of exotic species, but by most plants. About 90% of all terrestrial species enter into mycorrhizal symbiosis. Oak, beech, pine, spruce, birch, alder, walnut, wheat, barley, corn, tomato, strawberry, rose, heather, almost any meadow grass. All of them, if you look closely at their roots, do not exist alone, but in constant exchange with the fungus. Plants without mycorrhiza are a rare exception. These include, for example, cruciferous plants, cabbage, radish, rapeseed, as well as some pioneer species colonizing disturbed soils and aquatic plants. All other Greenland inhabitants are in this connection. Just think what this figure means. 9 out of 10 plants on Earth are not the loners we are used to seeing them as. 2/3 of all land area is in a state of continuous chemical dialogue with fungi. For centuries, we looked at a plant and saw only a plant. In reality, we were only seeing half of an entire community. The other half is hidden underground, invisible, and without it, the first simply cannot exist. Let's delve deeper into time. Approximately 450 million years ago, plants made the transition from water to land. In deposits from that period, in the Scottish locality of Riney, paleobotanists discovered remarkably clear imprints of the first terrestrial plants. They were preserved by a siliceous spring. Hot mineral water covered them and instantly turned them into stone, preserving the smallest details of their cellular structure. These pioneers still had almost no roots, only small underground stems called rhizomoids. And in cross-sections of these stems, under a microscope, structures completely identical to model mycorrhizal fungi are visible. Inside the cells are branched clusters, just like those of current arbuscular fungi living in the roots of ferns and grasses. It follows that fungal symbiosis did not arise after the formation of true roots. It appeared simultaneously with the emergence onto land, or perhaps it was precisely what made this emergence possible. It makes sense to pause here again. It is commonly believed that plants conquered land alone, that it was their personal triumph, the path from single-celled algae to ferns, horsetails, and seed plants. In reality, they emerged onto land together, plant and fungus. The plant possessed photosynthesis, the ability to create sugars from air and sunlight. The fungus, however, brought with it technology honed over billions of years. The ability to decompose solid substrates, dissolve minerals, and absorb substances over the entire surface of its finest threads. Plants brought energy from the heavens. Fungi provided access to substances beneath their feet. They united. And everything we call forest, meadow, field today, all green life on land, almost all of it, functions as a single unit. Plant above, fungus below. From this, a simple conclusion follows. The Earth's landscape, as we observe it, is not just a victory of plants over land. It is an alliance that has lasted for 450 million years. To destroy it means to return the land to the state from which plants once emerged. And this threat is by no means abstract. It materializes every time we treat a field with fungicide or plant a sterile monoculture forest. But more on that later. Let's forget about the tree itself for a moment and look at the fungus as an independent living creature with its own biography. A single mycelium can cover gigantic territories. For example, in Oregon in 2003, an individual honey mushroom from the genus Armillaria was described. A single genetic entity, covering an area of about 5.6 square miles and aged between 2 and 8,000 years. This is the largest living organism on the planet. If measured by mass, by occupied area, by the continuity of the organism, it surpasses both the blue whale and the redwood. It's just that it is distributed in the finest threads over many kilometers of soil and therefore remains invisible. Mycorrhizal fungi operate on different scales, usually square meters, less often hectares. However, the principle remains. An individual fungus is not just a patch of ground under a cap. It is an entire underground network. And this network can contact the roots not of one tree, but of dozens and sometimes hundreds. Mycorrhizae come in different types. Two main ones are worth distinguishing for more precise discussion later. The first is arbuscular mycorrhiza. Fungal hyphae penetrate inside the root cells, forming branched tree-like structures there that increase the surface area for exchange. This is the oldest and most common type. Almost all grasses, most agricultural crops, and many tropical trees exist with it. The second type is ectomycorrhiza. Here, hyphae wrap around the root tip from the outside with a dense sheath and penetrate between the cells, but not into them. This type is characteristic of most northern forest species: pine, spruce, oak, beech, birch. It is ectomycorrhizal fungi that produce the familiar cap mushrooms, porcini, chanterelles, russulas, fly agarix. Each such mushroom is in alliance with a specific tree species. Porcini with spruce, pine, oak. Aspen bolete with aspen. Birch bolete, as the name suggests, with birch. When we collect mushrooms, we are essentially seeing only the tip of the symbiosis that sustains the forest. If the same fungus is connected to the roots of two different trees, a channel forms between these trees. Substance can travel through this channel, or a signal. And here we come to the reason this conversation began. In 1997, Canadian forest ecologist Suzanne Simard published a paper in Nature that changed the perception of forests. She conducted the following experiment. She took two tree species growing side by side, birch and fir. She covered one with a transparent dome containing air with carbon dioxide labeled with a radioactive isotope. The tree, naturally, absorbed this carbon through its leaves, converted it into sugar during photosynthesis, and sent part of it to its roots. After some time, the radioactive label appeared in the roots of the neighboring tree, the one not under the dome, and not through the soil, but through the fungal threads that connected the roots of both. One fungus was common to both trees. Through it, sugar traveled from the donor to the recipient. This was the first direct evidence that trees of different species growing side by side actually exchange substances through a fungal network. Not a hypothesis, not a supposition, a measured fact. Since then, similar experiments have been repeated many times with different species, different fungi, different isotopes. The general conclusion: the transfer of substances through mycorrhiza between trees exists and can be significant, especially from older to younger, from healthy to suppressed, from illuminated to shaded. Simard continued her work. By 2015, she had formulated the concept of mother trees, the oldest and largest trees in the forest, which act as nodes, concentrators of the network. The greatest number of connections pass through them. And, according to her data, they are the ones that provide the most support to young saplings living in the shade, where they lack their own photosynthetic energy. Here, precision is needed, because a whole popularization industry has grown around these works, part of which has already diverged from science itself. Much is said about the Internet of the forest web, trees talking, about trees helping, caring, sending messages to each other. These are beautiful metaphors. They sell very well. But in the decades since Simard's initial works, a number of serious questions have accumulated. In 2023, a paper by Justine Cast and her colleagues was published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution with a serious critical re-evaluation. They showed three things. First, some of the conclusions about mother trees and targeted support for young trees were stretched, not so much by Simard's data as by how that data was subsequently retold in popular literature. Second, real direct evidence that an old tree consciously directs resources to a specific young one is lacking. Third, much of what seems like support is explained more simply. The network transports substances along a concentration gradient without any intent. Where there is less, that is where it flows. It's important to clarify this. The precise scientific picture today is as follows. The mycorrhizal network exists. It connects trees. Water, minerals, carbon and nitrogen move through it. Signaling molecules also travel through it. For example, when a tree is attacked by caterpillars, neighboring trees connected to it via fungi begin to produce defensive substances like tannins and terpenes in advance. This has been reliably documented in laboratory and field experiments. However, interpreting this as care, communication, or intentional help is an overstatement. A tree doesn't decide anything or choose anyone. It simply participates in a chemical exchange. Just as your liver participates in the exchange of blood with your kidneys, without a conscious decision to help each other. And this is a case where the scientific picture is not worse, but more honest than the popular one. It removes anthropomorphism and leaves what is truly astonishing. A complex, functioning, 450 million year old refined exchange system that operates without a single decision-making center. However, this does not diminish the scale of the phenomenon. Setting aside beautiful metaphors, we see only physics and chemistry. Within a radius of tens of meters, an old beech tree can be connected to hundreds of other trees. A single species of fungus, a single network unites them. And this is not an exception, but the rule for a healthy mixed forest. Imagine a typical mixed forest in Central Europe. Beech, spruce, larch, a bit of oak. Look beneath the layer of fallen leaves. Under every square meter of soil, according to various data, there are between 2 and 10 kilometers of fungal hyphae. Some of them form mycorrhizae, while others live freely, decomposing the forest litter. In 1 teaspoon of good forest soil, there are hundreds of meters of hyphae, and in the richest samples, by various estimates, up to 1 kilometer or even several kilometers. The figure varies greatly depending on the type of forest, measurement method, and time of year. But the order of magnitude remains. The invisible life underground is comparable in mass to what we see on the surface. Some studies claim it surpasses it. Half of all forest biomass is hidden beneath the soil. This is the half that no one shows. And now, the map of connections for which this story is being told. Let's take an adult beech tree. It stands for centuries, growing tens of billions of leaves in its lifetime. From its roots extend fungal hyphae, usually not just one, but several species. These hyphae stretch into the neighboring square meter, then into the next. They find the root endings of a young spruce growing in the beech's shade and attach to them. The same happens with the roots of a young oak 30 meters away, with the grass at the edge of the forest, with the shrubs at the base of the trees. For the same fungal species, all of this is united into a single circuit for exchange. Various substances move along this circuit. Sugars produced by the beech from carbon dioxide and sent downwards are partly consumed by the fungus itself and partly transferred to the young spruce, which is experiencing a lack of light in the shade and its own sugars. Water and minerals extracted by the fungus from deep soil layers are supplied upwards to the beech and other connected plants. Phosphorus is also transferred, the most deficient macronutrient for most soils, for which a tree is willing to give up to a third of its total carbon income to the fungus. Nitrogen, which leguminous plants fix from the air with the help of root nodule bacteria, is transferred to neighboring grasses through mycorrhizae. Stress signaling molecules prepare neighbors in advance for pest or virus attacks, and slowly, rare trace elements such as zinc and copper. This system represents one of the greatest deals in the history of life. The plant gives the fungus up to a third of what it produces using sunlight. In return, the fungus provides the plant with what it cannot obtain on its own. This exchange has continued non-stop for 450 million years, without pauses, without negotiations, without accounting. Such is the natural operation of the system until it is broken. The flip side. What happens when the network is broken? Clear cutting. This is a method of timber harvesting where everything in an area is cut down simultaneously, from old trees to young growth. From a short-term economic perspective, it's efficient. From an ecosystem perspective, it's what is usually left unsaid. It's not so much the forest that is destroyed, but the network itself. Living stumps continue to supply the fungus through preserved roots for several months, but when the sugar reserves run out, the fungal mycelium begins to degrade. Along with it, the soil's ability to retain moisture and minerals, facilitate exchange, and support biodiversity also deteriorates. Young shoots attempting to grow after logging are deprived of a ready-made mycorrhizal network beneath them. They have to build everything from scratch, from spores, random fragments, whatever survived at the edges of the plot. For some tree species, this process takes years. For others, decades. Researchers estimate that it takes several decades to a century for the network to fully recover in a clear-cut area. Everything depends on the type of soil, climate, what fungi survive at the edges, whether anything was replanted, or if the area was left for natural regrowth. This is what the channel will talk about again and again. The victim is not a single tree, nor even an entire grove. The victim is the language in which the forest communicated with itself, a language refined over 450 million years, and which now takes centuries to recover. The second disruption is monoculture. When a single species, usually fast-growing and commercially profitable, such as pine or spruce of the same age, is planted in place of a cleared mixed forest. Outwardly, it resembles a forest, rows of trees, a green canopy, even shadows. But from a mycorrhizal perspective, it's almost an empty space. A single tree species supports only a limited set of fungi. There is no network diversity, no exchange between different species. There is also no resistance to pests, for which the only possible food source is this very planting. One outbreak of barb beetles is enough to kill the entire plantation in a season. One drought to prevent recovery because there is no network capable of redistributing water. The third, less frequently mentioned disruption is agriculture. Regular plowing physically severs the mycelium. Fungicides destroy it chemically. Sterile mineral fertilizers make it economically unnecessary. The tree or ear of grain begins to receive nutrients directly and stops feeding the fungus with sugars, leading to the breakdown of the symbiosis. After 10 to 20 years of intensive farming, the soil loses most of its fungal mass. It looks like soil, but functions as a much poorer system, requiring ever more external inputs, water, fertilizers, protective agents, just to maintain yields at the same level. It's important not to exaggerate here. The mycorrhizal network is not the only thing that disappears with clear-cutting, monocultures, and intensive agriculture. Much is lost. Soil, water, animals, microclimate, insect and bird diversity, microbial community, organic carbon. But mycorrhizae are almost never discussed in the public sphere. The disappearance of wolves is discussed. Deforestation as such is discussed. Soil loss is discussed. But about the rupture of the oldest living community on the planet, silence. The silence doesn't arise because something is being hidden. Its cause is that the phenomenon is simply imperceptible. Mycorrhizae don't create spectacular visuals. They have no face. Their demise lacks drama. They simply cease to function. And in place of the former complex forest, a quick commercial plantation arises. 20 years later, it's cut down. 40 years later, the land turns into a different soil. 100 years later, it's already a different surface of the planet. From this discussion, 3 key themes can be drawn. First, terrestrial plants are not solitary. A plant and a fungus represent a single bond, having 2 visible parts, green above and invisible below. Our attention is constantly drawn to the upper part, and we judge the forest by its crowns. Meanwhile, its true life mostly takes place underground. Second, a full-fledged exchange occurs between trees. Not a conversation, but an exchange of substances, sometimes of signals. Not because trees intentionally share, but because the fungal network transports everything that can be transported along a concentration gradient. Everything flows to where there is less of something. This is enough to form complex balances throughout the community. This is also enough for an old forest to hold together as a single entity, whereas a single aged planting disintegrates at the first serious impact. Third, and this point is precisely the reason why it's worth spending 30 minutes talking about fungi. The destruction of the mycorrhizal network is the destruction of the forest's very infrastructure. Not a secondary detail, not a side effect, not an embellishment, precisely infrastructure. And it doesn't recover in a single season. It takes a period encompassing several human lifetimes. Now, what to do with all this? Here I will not utter grand words. I will not call for saving nature. I will not campaign against buying paper. These are separate big topics for other episodes, and they are broader than the issue of mycorrhizae alone. I'll say something specific. Within the horizon of the coming Monday, for someone who has a yard, a garden, a dacha, or just a patch of land outside their window. First, don't clear all the leaves in autumn. Leave at least some under the trees. Fallen leaves are the main food for mycorrhizal fungi and all the soil life that works around them. A bare lawn under a tree means the tree is left without dinner, and precisely in autumn when the fungus is gaining mass before winter. Second, if you're planting something new, don't buy sterile washed soil. If you can, Take soil from their local trees and grasses grow well. It already contains the right mycorrhizal composition. Some nurseries sell seedlings with inoculated mycorrhizal substrate on their roots. It costs a little more, but works significantly better. Especially for fruit trees, conifers, and ornamental forest species. Third, if you have an old tree in your yard and it's bothering someone, don't rush to remove it. It's likely a node in the mycorrhizal network of your entire plot. Removing it means rebuilding the entire underground part of your yard from scratch. Young plantings will take a long time to understand where they are and what to do. Fourth, don't compact the soil under the crowns. Don't park your car on the lawn under the tree. Don't pave it with tiles. Hyphae are delicate. They don't tolerate compacted, airless soil well. A circle with a radius of 6.5 feet from the trunk should remain alive. Fifth, the simplest. Don't rush to use fungicide on every mold in the garden. Most of what we consider mold and strive to destroy are either mycorrhizal fungi themselves in various forms or their beneficial neighbors. Spot treating a diseased plant, yes. Dousing everything indiscriminately for prevention means sterilizing your soil for years. This is small. But small, multiplied by many, creates a different landscape. Not saving nature. Rather, accepting that we live within a system that is 450 million years older than us, and smarter than any decision we make about it. And the most reasonable thing to do is not to interfere with its work where it still works. And one question we want to leave you with. Destruction is easy to imagine, looking at a felled tree stump or a burning forest. But destruction that is hidden from view is much harder to imagine. When it happens underground. When it concerns a network we've never seen, because it's never been shown on screen. Perhaps the main deficit of our century is precisely the ability to see the invisible, to discern the connection that holds everything visible in place. For the world we live in is largely woven from networks that remain unseen. The octopus's intelligence, discussed in the last episode, is distributed across 8 tentacles and hidden from the camera. Mycorrhizae, which we are talking about today, are hidden beneath a layer of forest litter. And what lies ahead? In the next episode, we'll rise above your rooftop, to a bird that remembers your face for years, not as a metaphor, literally, a crow.